Mr. President, thank you again for giving us this chance to catch up with you. Now, it's been almost 4 years since you've been in office. And at this point, I wonder if you could share with us, what do you think is your biggest achievement? And what would you consider to be the way in which we would define your legacy?
내가 아직 1년 반이 남았기 때문에 뭐 지금.
Well, thank you, Mr. Winkler. Of course, I still have a year and a half left to my term, so I'm going to continue to focus my efforts on trying to do my best. As you know, as soon as I was sworn in as president in 2008, we all went through the first global financial crisis, which many considered to be the worst since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And it was a very challenging time for me, as well as many other global leaders around the world, trying to overcome that crisis. And just shy of 3 years after that, we're still seeing a lot of dangers in the global economy. And so there's a lot looming ahead. So there's a lot of things for me as well as others to do. Of course, we're going to focus our efforts on trying to recover from this challenge, but also not only that, in the long term, try to make us more stronger as we come out of this crisis. So that I consider this as my opportunity to make Korea and other countries to be able to make them stronger in the future. And also, Mr. Winkler, we do have some good news despite all the challenges that we're facing right now. I'm very fortunate and happy to inform you that many Korean people are feeling very proud of some of the achievements that they've been able to make. As you know, Korea's trade has gone up despite the challenges. We are joining back the $1 trillion club. And last November, Korea was given the privilege of hosting the G20 Seoul Summit, thereby contributing to recovery of the global economy. And also we had good news this year. Korea was awarded the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. So these are some of the good news that we have. And I'm happy to note that the Korean people are they're right in there, and they're trying to do their very best.
Last year, you said the government should think about a tax for reunification. And in Germany, that cost was estimated at about $2 trillion. By comparison, what sort of scale would you consider to be the expense for Korean reunification?
통일 비용이 얼마 들 것인가 하는 것은.
Well, first of all, Mr. Winkler, we're going to have to, in order to assess the cost of unification, we're going to have to see how unification is going to come about. Of course, there's a lot of possibilities and contingencies that can happen or bring about unification of the Korean peninsula. We can see some unexpected things happening within North Korea which may lead to unification, and the cost will be related to that situation and particular circumstance. On the other hand, although it may take a lot longer than we expect, unification can come peacefully as we see the North Korean economy performing or improving a lot better than it is doing today. And of course, the cost of that kind of unification is going to be different from the one I just talked about formally. So I think it's kind of difficult for us to come up with a ballpark figure for unification cost, because we have so many things that could happen.
나는 통일 비용을 관계를 이야기한 것은.
And the reason why I mentioned the unification tax was, number one, is for us to be prepared for all contingencies. And secondly, I raised this issue because I wanted the Korean people not to get too used to this current situation of being divided. I wanted them to continuously be interested in the issue of unification, which is, of course, one of our ultimate objectives for my people.
You mentioned just a few minutes ago unexpected things that we are seeing from North Korea. Could you elaborate what you mean by unexpected things? And also, I'm just wondering if in all this you see reunification as an event in the next decade. And is that the objective that you're working towards?
근데 뭐 지금.
Well, sir, of course, like I said, anything can happen on the Korean peninsula, and there's a lot of things that we're going to be prepared for. But again, our ultimate objective is to try to achieve peaceful unification of the Korean peninsula. And in order for that to happen, we really want and we're sincere about this, wanting the North Korean economy to be more self-sustainable so that they can become more prosperous and take care of their people in a better way.
아무튼 그 남북의 통일이
But again, when we talk about unification of the Korean peninsula between the two Koreas, I'm quite certain that it's not going to happen exactly as we hope for, as we calculate it or as we envision it. There's going to be a lot of things that we're going to have to be prepared for, and so this is what I have in mind.
But give us just an example, if you could, of what you think is unexpected.
그래서 예상치 않은 것을 내가 여기서 구체적으로
Well, Mr. Winkler, I would be very cautious to elaborate or to be too specific when talking about or predicting about North Korea, and I don't think it would be very appropriate for a variety of reasons. But I'm just saying that we look at history and what happened to particular countries that were in similar circumstances, so we're prepared for all contingencies.
Is there anything that you're doing to prepare for, say, an increase in North Korean hostilities next year, which is ahead of national elections in Seoul, and it's the 100th anniversary of Kim Il-sung's birthday?
그런 내년 총대 중요한 해라고 봅니다.
Yes, as you mentioned, sir, next year is going to be a very important year for both Koreas for the reasons that you just outlined. Like I said, we will continue to be very prepared for anything that could happen. Of course, on our own, we're being prepared, and of course, in conjunction with our ally, the United States, and also working together with many of our partners on the international community. And we mustn't see anything happen on the Korean peninsula that may lead to instability. And in order to prevent such a thing from happening, of course, my government will continue to build trust with the North Koreans through dialogue and other peaceful means, and of course in the international stage as well, multilaterally. We'll try to bring about a peaceful dialogue into the North Korean peninsula issue.
우리가 내년 3월이면 3월 말은
And it just so happens that next year Korea will be hosting the second nuclear security summit near the end of March. And so this will be an opportunity where we have 50 plus heads of state and government coming to Korea to discuss issues of non-proliferation and nuclear security and safety. And so there are a lot of factors that will be playing next year and in and around the Korean peninsula. Of course, we do not rule out anything happening next year, and we will be prepared.
Mr. President, in the context of those events that you are talking about next year, what's your understanding of the transition from Kim Jong Il, the second is the son, Kim Jong Un, really the next leader? Have you any plans to meet the leadership during your tenure?
뭐그 후계 체계로
Well, first of all, it seems quite certain that the transition or the succession within North Korea will probably be more concrete come next year. I think the North Korean leadership will want to cement their succession as soon as possible, and we expect that to happen sometime next year. If you asked me about whether I had any intention to meet with the leadership in North Korea, if the opportunity arises, I'm of course open to it, and I've said this before, and I guess my counterpart would have to be, at this moment in time, Kim Jong Il, the father, instead of the Kim Jong Un, his son.
If we now turn, Mr. President, to the economy, how do you respond to complaints that South Korea competes unfairly? Samsung allegedly taking Apple technology, and the won, people have said, is artificially low. How do you respond to those complaints?
뭐 나는 삼성이 이제 국제사회에서 이렇게 소송이 붙는다 하는.
Well, when it comes to what you mentioned about Samsung and Apple, this of course is something that's going on between two private companies. As president, I think it's not appropriate for me to make any specific comments about it, and the only information that I get is from people like you, journalists, who are covering this story. But what I do know is that when I was looking at what's going on between Samsung and Apple, I was reminded of the fact that Samsung has grown so much in the international stage as a private company, and I think it reflects their stature, the fact that they're butting heads with Apple, and I think that goes to show that Samsung has grown a lot over the years. But again, when it comes to the specifics, I don't know what's exactly going on, but I do know that that it is something that And Samsung has, to my understanding, also filed a suit against Apple, and it's going back and forth. But again, it's a reflection of the growing stature of the Korean companies doing on the international or the global stage. But what I wanted to emphasize is what you mentioned about exchange rates. You said that some people are criticizing Korean government for keeping it artificially low, but I just wanted to make it very clear that my government does not wish to see that happen, and we do not engage in such activities. That may have happened in the past, but Korea, as you know, we're now an active member in the international community. We were host for the G20, trying to contribute to the global economy's recovery and sustainable growth. And with rising commodity prices, for us to have an artificially low exchange rate is not good for us either, and we're very mindful of that. And because another very important issue related to this, as you know very well, sir, is that if we have such an artificially low exchange rate, that causes a lot of upward pressure on a consumer price, and which is something that my government as well as others are extremely careful about. And this is a very important issue for us economically. So no, my government is not engaged in any artificial activities, and controlling the consumer prices is our #1 priority at the moment.
In that context, is it at all curious or puzzling to you why, if there is no kind of restraint on the won, the Korean won, that it wouldn't appreciate more rapidly, say, relative to the yen in global foreign exchange?
뭐 그런 특별한 이유는 없다고. 지금 우리가 원화제로 상대하는 건 결국
Well, the reason why, well, first of all, the Korean won and its exchange rate is very much closely, of course, related to the dollars. And we do not see anything in the domestic market that affects the exchange rate of the won compared to what's happening here in the United States. We know that Mr. Ben Bernanke, upon his announcement yesterday, I believe, immediately that had an effect on the Korea stock market. It went down, as well as the Korean won's exchange rate. So as you can see, the Korean won is very much dependent on what happens here in the United States and the government's decision here. And so it is very much affected by that, probably more so than any domestic reasons that is happening within Korea.
Is it fair, Mr. President, based on your perspective, to conclude that you don't see any validity in the complaints about either so-called artificially low exchange rates, or for that matter, you don't see any validity in the assertions that somehow the companies in Korea are lacking in any kind of fair play with competition with U.S. companies?
동의할 수 없습니다.
Yes, well, I agree that there is no validity to such criticisms. Let me just say that outright, because really, seriously, I believe in the Korean economy achieving transparency in whatever it does. I believe that that is the prerequisite for making our economy get on a path towards sustainable development. If the government were to engage in order to gain some temporary uplifting measures when it comes to exchange rate or anything else, I think that is not going to last. It's not going to be sustainable. I hope, Mr. Winkler, that today's interview with Bloomberg will be an opportunity for everyone around the world to understand that very clearly.
Here's hoping. Mr. President, you mentioned yesterday the comments of the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, and the economy. With this European financial crisis continuing, and also the concern over U.S. unemployment, how much growth do you think will slow in South Korea next year? And we're working with a forecast at the moment, an IMF forecast of 2012 growth of 4.4%. So what's your expectation?
지금 상황을 보면은
Well, we're going to look at all these factors affecting us currently, and I agree that many people are saying that this economic hardship, so to speak, is probably going to continue for the next 2 to 3 years at least. And of course, this all hinges upon how well, number one, the Europeans are able to effectively respond and to prevent the current crisis that's going on within the Eurozone. It's going to very much affect the global economy's recovery and sustainable growth. And secondly, when we have to also look at the U.S. economy and how well it recovers. And we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see the figures coming in after the fourth quarter this year in order for Korea to predict how we're going to perform next year. So having said that, I'm aware that the IMF is predicting a 4.4% growth for Korea. I'm hoping that it will be somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe at least 4% or a little bit over that.
Is there anything, Mr. President, that is missing, as far as you're concerned, in the way leaders are addressing the financial crisis in Europe? Is there anything that you specifically see as missing in the response?
이번 그 11월 열리는 칸에서 열리는 G20
Well, this coming November, the French will be hosting the G20 in Cannes, and I'm sure that's going to be an opportunity for all the leaders taking part in this meeting to discuss in depth what's going on within the Eurozone, among other topics and among other agenda items. Of course, the biggest challenge that we face right now is what's going to happen to Greece. Well, first of all, we're going to have to do a lot in order to prevent this from spreading to other countries in the region, because if that happens, then I'm afraid that it's going to become very unmanageable for us, and it's going to have very adverse effects on the recovery of the global economy. So it's critically important that we really pool our efforts to try to stop this contagion in Greece. Now, in order for us to do that, the leaders of the leading economies in Europe, including, of course, Germany, France, and others, the leaders there will have to become very actively engaged. I know that they're doing their best right now, and I'm also mindful that they're very much constrained and affected by domestic factors within their countries, but this must not become an excuse for them to be reticent or less actively engaged in trying to resolve the issue in Greece, because that will be very critically important, like I said, for us to resolve this issue for the future of Europe and for the world.
And South Korea being as important as it is economically to the world in so many ways, are there people that you've shared your perspective with, policymakers that you've shared your perspective with recently?
우리가 그 정상들 간에 만나면은
Well, I meet on a regular basis with many world leaders through various forums, and so you can imagine that we all sit and talk about these issues a lot whenever we see each other, and we are currently very much working hard among ourselves in order to resolve this issue through international cooperation. In fact, just yesterday, we've made publicly circulated a letter which has been signed by 6 countries, members of the G20, and we deliver this letter, open letter, to President Sarkozy, who's the host of the G20, asking that the European leaders engage more actively in order to prevent and to staunch the crisis that is looming in Europe.
보다도 그리스 국가가
And we also know that the leaders in Greece, that they have made some painful decisions, but I think they're going to have to really keep it up in order to resolve this issue and the challenge that they face. And I remember an academic from Greece who visited Korea recently. He warned that Korea must, or for any other country for that matter, must not follow the path of what Greece is going through right now. But again, I know that the political leaders, especially in Greece, are going to have to make some big, painful, and historic strategic decisions.
And is there anything you've done recently to encourage Greece, having the experience in South Korea of not only surviving but overcoming the crisis in the 90s, in the late 90s, and emerging far stronger?
우리가 그런 메시지를 우리가
Well, we've relayed our message to our friends in Greece that we're, of course, always prepared to help them in any way we can. But when it comes to any policy recommendations, we've always emphasized that, especially during times of crisis, it's very important that the government works together with the private sector, but also in particular with the labor unions as well. This is very important because when we look at our own experience back in 2008, the government sat down with the leaders of the labor and we hammered out an agreement among ourselves. Both sides decided to make sacrifices in order to recover from this challenge. For instance, we both agreed that we will try to retain the jobs of the workers by making sacrifices both on the part of the government as well as the labor union. Another measure that we agreed was to freeze all payments and wages for a certain period of time. For example, for 3 years, the government decided to freeze the wages of all the public servants as a way for the government to make sacrifices. On the labor union side, they also agreed to payment freezes and all these other specific measures that we came to agree, which helped us overcome the crisis back in 2008 faster than any other economy.
Mr. President, yesterday, following the pronouncement of the Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, stock markets went into convulsions, and today, when we look at the world, we see actually all the emerging markets, if they're grouped together as an index, for the first time showing, if they close where they are today, a bear market. So just wondered, what measures are you prepared to take to prevent excessive volatility in the won, the currency, and the stock market from disrupting your economy?
그 한국 증권 시장이 경제 개방이 돼 있고
Well, Mr. Winkler, as you know, the Korean stock market is very open to international investors and to the outside market. Currently, about 30% is composed of foreign investors. Now, this can be an advantage, also a disadvantage for us, because we have very free flow of capital in and out of Korea and in our stock markets. But it's good when the times are good, but especially during times of crisis, then you can see the volatility of funds going up, and that could cause a lot of problems. But nonetheless, we have no plans whatsoever to restrict the flow of capital in and out of Korea. Of course, we're going to look at what happens in the market, and we're going to be very mindful with our policy options, but I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Mr. President, you've eliminated planned tax breaks this month for the big industrial groups known as the chaebol. How concerned are you that the chaebol's concentration of economic and industrial power is contributing to the so-called wealth gap in Korea?
대기업들의 그
Well, sir, there's no denying that the chaebols in Korea have a very high concentration in terms of capital and influence when it comes to business in Korea. But rather than focusing on the negative aspect of such chaebols having or enjoying a lot of influence, I tend to focus more on the positive aspects of these chaebols or conglomerates in Korea. Number one, of course, is, as I mentioned earlier, is the advanced stature and the competitiveness of these chaebols in Korea, especially on the global stage. And we hope to see them perform better in the future in terms of competitiveness and productivity. And secondly, you mentioned the wealth gap, but I do not necessarily see the wealth gap within Korea being caused by the chaebols or their increased influence in industry. In fact, I consider that this issue of wealth gap to be not a problem exclusive to Korea, but in all countries around the world, including here in the United States. And when you look at the severity of the gap, it's fortunate for Korea that our gap is relatively less than the one you are seeing in either here in the United States or other countries. But we do have our share of those who are going through a lot of difficulties, and so the government has been focusing its efforts and coming up with very specific policies that will help address some of the difficulties that they are going through by increasing our welfare spending, by coming up and providing them with good jobs. And luckily and fortunately for Korea, our unemployment rate is better than other countries. In terms of the overall unemployment rate, right now it's about 3.3 to 3.4%, and the youth unemployment is slightly over 7%.
The last question, Mr. President, concerns something that could be of vital interest, and that is this natural gas pipeline from Russia to Korea more than just a dream, or is the latest iteration of it, have the Russians and North Koreans reached an agreement? Is there a timeline that you're aware of?
뭐 그 대답을 하기 전에 조금 전에 그 우리 한국 대기
Well, Mr. Winkler, before that, if I may add, just to follow up on my answer to regarding the Korean conglomerates or the chaebars, especially because the Korean economy, we're all going through some challenging times right now, and because of the difficulties being faced by the less privileged in Korean society, I've always stressed the importance of the big chaebars cooperating and working closely with our small and medium-sized enterprises. And this is about common prosperity. It's about sharing the benefits of growth. And so I've always emphasized, for instance, to some of our leaders of the chaebars, those who are very wealthy and well off, that it'll be in their interest as well as others for them to exercise a lot more social responsibility by giving back. In a way that is very effective and long-lasting. And they are, I'm happy to note, very enthusiastic about working together with the SMEs as well as with the government and other private sectors. And you also mentioned the tax break that I promised the chaebars. We initially promised a 5% tax break to the chaebars. 3% of that already, for not just the chaebars, but for all the companies. Of the 5% promise, already the 3% has been implemented. The remaining 2%, I said that due to this, a lot of the difficulties that we're going through, that we're going to suspend it for the next maybe 2 to 3 years. And to answer your question about the gas pipeline, as you know, in the eastern Siberian region of Russia, there is a tremendous reservoir of gas. And if you look at the map, the eastern Siberian region gas can only be sold to the 3 countries in Northeast Asia, including Korea, China, and Japan. It is just not viable for Russia to transport that gas all the way westward because it's just so far away. So that leaves you the 3 countries of China, Korea, and Japan with the only viable market in this region for Russian gas. So I do not consider this as a far-fetched dream. In fact, it is very economically and from a business perspective, a win-win for everyone involved. When you look at from the Russian perspective, it's good for them because they can sell their excess gas in the region. For Korea, we can buy gas at reasonable price. And also for the North Koreans, they could also get some benefit by collecting the transaction fee, so to speak, by allowing the transport of gas through their countries.
지금 러시아와 북한은 서로 이야기를 하고.
And I'm aware that the Russians and the North Koreans have been discussing this issue and that some progress, good progress, is being made.
그러나 그 문제는
But of course, this involves a lot of parties, and we're going to have to review it very comprehensively and very strategically. So as for the timeline, I think it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's probably going to take a little bit more time for us to finalize the deal, but it is very much doable.
그러나 지금 러시아와 북한은 활발하게 이야기합니다.
But again, I know that the Russians and the North Koreans are discussing this issue among themselves.
President, you've been very gracious. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.